Okay, hey everybody. So I'm going to talk you through a specific dilemma that was shared by one of your classmates, and she did give her permission for me to use this as an example, and I'm not going to divulge her identity, but I picked this one because it's something that I hear all the time. So you are in good company. And we've actually talked about it a fair amount of time, so it's interesting now to actually have a real life version of this cheating dilemma to go through. So we're gonna use this same process, and what you're gonna be doing for your assignment today is basically just giving me a reflection of what actually happened in your process. So maybe giving more detail than you may have in the group forum. So I'll say more about that at the end. What I'm gonna do is, we'll spend a minute with the first part, but we're mostly gonna take the time to do step 4 together, because I really want you to see how this would happen, where you use material that we've learned to, shed some light on this kind of a dilemma. So one thing that I sometimes do, and this is pretty elaborate, so you wouldn't do this all the time, it maybe would just be mental, but I've actually diagrammed her dilemma. So we're gonna just use letters to stand in for everybody, because obviously we wanna keep this all anonymous. But in the middle of the dilemma, we have C. So this is our subject, right, who's posing the question. So C is roommates with R, right here, so they're in a roommate relationship, and she is also good friends with X over here, who lives behind her, and they went on spring break together. How fun, right? So they all went out and partied somewhere warmer than here, and another dynamic that's going on here is that roommate, so C's roommate, is a couple with Y, so they're in a romantic relationship. And so what happened on spring break, as often does, is X and Y hooked up, okay? So X and Y spent an evening dancing together, making out, whatever. And C witnessed this, asked them to stop in the moment. They did not, and they continued their flirtation. So R, I think, was not present at this time. So C's dilemma is in the aftermath of that, in how particularly to handle her friendship with X, because she feels very upset. So there was definitely a lot of upsetness with what's going on between the choices that X made with Y. And now after this happened, C did choose to tell R. So this was one of our questions, right? Should you keep it to yourself if you know of something that's happened, or do you have to tell? So in this case, C fairly immediately told R, and also did confront X. And X's defense was that Y told her that he was not actually with R at the time. So, we don't know necessarily if that's true, but that's in the mix. So the question that C is asking is really about how to handle her friendship with X here. So they're good friends, and how should she treat X going forward, right? Does she have to basically cut off her friendship with this person because of how disgusted she is with this person's actions? So with this first step of identifying the underlying moral questions, a dilemma like this actually has a lot of different questions in it. And that's partly why it's so hard to work it through, because it's a question about, how do I feel about the type of romantic activity that happened between these 3 people, right? So we have some people who have special duties to each other because they're in some type of a relationship. And usually that comes with the idea that we've made special promises, whether or not they've been verbal or not. And what those promises are is actually quite important. So I'm going to come back to that. But there's also some kind of, promises that happen in a friendship where you have a certain duty to choose the kind of people that you feel are a good fit for you and that make you a better person. Maybe that idea of, friendship's kind of about self-improvement in some way too. So, it's the sound to me was that C is kind of being dragged down by this, this question of how to now handle her friendship with X. So, the underlying question might be about the morality of quote unquote cheating. So, did something truly bad really occur? And therefore, do I want to be associated with that bad thing? So it might be about cheating. It might be about friendship. It might be about the kind of person that I expect, to have a friendship with, the kind of person that, I think will share my values or that will care about the same things that I do. So it could be a dilemma about friendship, about what are we supposed to do when somebody we love does something we don't like. So, I don't have the answer to which of those is the real question. They're probably both in the mix. But even just starting to think about, again, what is really bothering me might help clarify, what part of this dilemma do you really want to put your emphasis on. So the part I want to skip down to, so obviously there is definitely emotions around this. In this case, when there's so many different issues, it might be a case of emotions hindering us from seeing our moral duty, because oftentimes, especially if the emotions are negative, like we're mad about something, it's really hard to do, like logical analysis. And that's not a bad thing, right? That's a human thing. So that's why we try to get it out of the way in step 2. So the stakeholders we basically have here, and there might be more if we really were to dive into this, and if this is your situation, you might know of other people who are also affected by this, but this is definitely enough for us to work with. So what duties do we owe towards each? We've already talked briefly about this because we have a question of how do I treat my relationship with my friend who did the cheating, with my friend who was cheated on, with my acquaintance who also did the cheating. What do I owe to each of these people? So one of the things that's really crucial for us to do is to decide whose interest to prioritize. And so remember, C's in the mix too. So C's comfort level and C's, again, like who does she want to hang out with? What kind of people does she want to be associated with? That's in the mix too. So that's gonna matter. The thing that is unclear to me in how this dilemma was presented was really what R's feelings are about this. So if there was a wrong done to somebody, it was done to R, meaning that what happened here was this duty was the one that was most violated. So if they truly were in a romantic relationship at this time, which again, Y denies, then some type of violation may have occurred, because normally one of the promises that we might make in a relationship is that we're not going to make out with somebody else when we're on spring break. So the reason why this is unclear to me is that that gets a little lost in this dilemma. The writer doesn't necessarily share what R's reaction is. So she does say that she told R, but she doesn't say how upset R is. And so I'm guessing probably fairly upset, which is a fairly typical reaction to finding out that your person has been stepping out on you. But at the same time, we're not sure. So one of the principles that I've suggested using in a case like this is the principle of humanity from Immanuel Kant's work. And this was where we seek to treat everybody as an end in themselves rather than as a mere means. So we want to honor the goals that somebody has as if they, as an individual, have a value beyond all price, that we want to sort of throw our, respect at them in a way that acknowledges that, and doesn't just, use them for our own advantages. And so in cheating dilemmas, obviously that part has been stepped on, because what are we doing when we're breaking some of these duties is we're using somebody else as a means, right, for some type of satisfaction. Now, there's a lot of underlying assumptions about that being wrong, about using somebody for a means of, maybe sexual gratification or something, of that necessarily being automatically wrong. So that is one assumption that we should question here, because what I want to point out is that wrong only occurs if R feels wronged. So what we need to know is what are R's ends. So what are R's goals in her relationship with Y? Maybe they had an agreement that spring break was fair game for everybody. Maybe they really broke up the night before, so we don't actually know what the agreements between R and Y were at the time that this cheating occurred. So that actually matters, because if Y was not respecting her as an end in herself, right, and violated a promise, even if it's, kind of like one of those unspoken promises we make to each other, that would be treating her as a means, right? Just using her as, I've got my girlfriend here, but I'm also going to do what I want on the side. So that would be treating somebody as a means. However, maybe, she is turned on by that. Maybe she is into the idea of an open relationship. Who knows? We don't know what R's ends are, what her goals for the relationship are. So it could be that Y's behavior is not as egregious as it seems. Could be, okay? So we need to know more about what R thinks, right? This is a really crucial point. Now, remember, the underlying question was really, how should I confront X, right? What should I do about my friendship with X? Because she also cheated. She claims that Y was a free man at the time. Maybe he was, but C really wants to know, how do I deal with X? Because we've been great friends up to this point, and I just don't know how to proceed with somebody who has done something so egregious. So this is really then a question about, do I want to be a friend to somebody who has made a choice that I would not make? So by that I mean, it sounds to me like what X did is a standard that C would not want to follow in her own choices, right? So X did something that C would not do herself. So do I want to remain friends with somebody who does things that I don't like and that I don't agree with? That rephrases the question a little bit, where it might become either easier or sometimes more difficult to see what the correct answer is. We could use one of our pluralist approaches, which I tend to favor often, and it's because, again, they're more nuanced. So in this case, friendship is a virtue. We might want to say, well, what would a good friend do, right, in this situation? So I feel like my friendship duties have been somehow violated in how X acted. What would a good friend do in that case? And so C did confront X. X defended herself. What would a good friend then do? So, again, we're looking for the golden mean. This is Aristotle's approach to virtue ethics. We're looking for an extreme between going so far overboard that you're maybe enabling choices that are not healthy for people or whatever, or being too restrained where you don't address something that's bothering you in the friendship and maybe don't say anything when you really want to. So somewhere in the middle there could be that golden mean of how should C act with X. And it could be that there needs to be more hard conversations had, not so much about you should not have been with Y, but I'm not sure I can trust you in the way that I did, because trust is vital to friendship. If we're going to have an ideal friendship here, what I'm going to need to know is that you make the kind of choices that I would also make. Is that fair to ask in a friendship? I'm not sure. What this person would have to really examine is what does being a good friend mean to me? Because obviously we're not going to be able to agree with everything that everybody does at all times. So what does a good friend do when their friend does something that they don't want to do? Now, again, I don't necessarily know the right answer to this. My personal opinion here, I'm going to sneak this in because I can, is that it really goes back to R, because there could have been absolutely no moral problem with what happened that night if R, one, did not feel harmed by it, or two, had explicitly also made it her ends to allow Y, or perhaps they weren't together, right, to allow Y to do whatever he wanted that night. So whatever her take is on it is actually pretty important. Now, I think there was one other approach I was going to use, but I think you get the idea here now, right? So now let's see, last step is to go with your instincts. At this point, what it's sounding to me is that, C has to examine two things. What does it mean to be a good friend? And also, what does it mean to be a good partner? Is there something fundamentally morally wrong with what's occurring between R and Y? Or maybe they are defining a relationship in a terms that is not necessarily common, but it's also not unethical. So that is bringing up the question of, what is a good relationship? What kind of duties do we owe in a good relationship? And it could be that R and Y were totally fine at this point. Who knows, So what I want you to do for your assignment, you're just going to turn it into me through Dropbox again, but I'd like to actually hear your thought process of you working through this. I don't necessarily want you to share straight journaling quotes with me, because I feel like that really is just for you. I don't want you to feel like you have to give that level of detail, but I do want to hear you specifically working through this dilemma that you shared, and particularly with step 4, at least 2 of our approaches that we've examined should be applied to it. And I think that the golden mean for approaches is probably between 3 and 5. And so this is because it's super important to look at multiple lenses. I can't stress that enough, that the danger in any type of analysis is when we stick to one method, right? Part of the reason we take all that time to go through so many theories is that we need to have multiple viewpoints to apply, because it's really hard to tell what you're missing until you do that. So, you know, maybe no more than a page, 2 pages. It can be pretty short, but you have the weekend to work on this. It will be due Monday night, so Monday at midnight, and then we'll start our next week together with Tuesday post and all that, and I'll send you more information about that before long. Reach out with any questions as always, and I look forward to the next video.